Well, that was one of the things I really felt like I took away from the pandemic was kids want to play and they want to play in an ensemble. So, I mean, we had a few kids that kind of took advantage of the practice time and the feedback, but I had a lot of kids and this is true of every teacher I've talked to, right? There's kids that didn't turn anything in, and we're trying to piece together, the Brady Bunch recording thing. And I mean, nobody signed up for that. We didn't sign up for that. The kids didn't sign up for that. Nobody wanted that, right? So when I came back, man, I backed way off on the assessment. And you know what? I almost feel like, I mean, I still know what the kids can do because I move around the room a lot. And a lot of times I'll just go sit down next to a kid and play along. I play all day long. Like, I don't really stand up and do much of this until almost, right before the gig. Otherwise, I got a metronome going and I'm playing different instruments. But if I'm moving around and I'm sitting next to kids and playing, like, I know what you can do and what you can't do. I don't need to do a formal test.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the good fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and leaders in the band community. And now for my next guest, John Wojciechowski. Hi, John.
Hello.
So welcome to the Everything Band podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, John, you were recommended to me by one of my previous guests, and I know that a little bit about you from kind of doing some research of my own and watching some videos, and I was wondering if you could kind of tell the guests who you are and what you do.
I am saxophonist, musician, teacher. I like to think of myself basically as a musician who does a lot of different things. My day-to-day is I teach band and jazz band at St. Charles North High School, which is in a suburb of Chicago. And then also I'm a fairly active jazz musician in the Chicago area and, Midwest country, but primarily Chicago. So that's kind of the 30,000 foot view.
All right, John. So could you tell everyone your origin story? How did you get into music as a child, and what sort of led on this? What was the beginnings of your journey?
So my father was a jazz organist. And so basically from birth, I have been listening to the music. And so from what I remember, my dad had this melodica laying around, and I picked it up, and I guess I figured out a couple tunes on it. And at this point, I think I was like 8, maybe. So he said, I think after I had kind of done that, I think he was like, well, there's some aptitude here, so maybe it's time for you to learn an instrument. So what do you want to play? And this is a funny story. I wanted to play the accordion because my grandmother really liked the accordion. And he he played accordion before he played the organ, and he hated it. So he was like, no, choose again. So I picked the saxophone for whatever reason. I think I was really drawn to Sonny Stitt. I don't know if it was the album covers or what, but I mean, obviously I had been hearing the stuff in the house all these years, but so I picked the saxophone, and he went around kind of like interviewing teachers. and he found this gentleman named Jerry Gravel, who was nearby, and he had done a lot of show work, and he was an arranger in Detroit. I'm from. I skipped that part. Originally, I'm from the Detroit area. So anyway, he was an arranger, doubler, kind of all around, journeyman musician, and so he really got me started properly. And he used to bring in all these. At the time, I didn't really know what they were, but basically, it was like I was learning all these songs from the Great American Songbook. In addition to your normal, I did the full Rubank thing, all the books, all the duets. I used to record the duet on my little cassette thing, and I would play the one line and then go play along with it. And I did all that kind of stuff. The other thing that was really great about Mr. Gravel was when I got to, so I started playing, so I started taking lessons when I was 8. This was like the end of 3rd grade. Band where I went to school didn't start till 5th grade. Well, by 6th grade, he said, it's time to start doubling. So I started playing flute and clarinet in 6th grade, which was great because then by the time I got to college, I kind of already had that under my fingers. When all my colleagues were trying to figure out how to double, like I was at a distinct advantage. So I am forever grateful and fortunate that I had a teacher that got me started right, got me learning the standards, standard tunes, and also playing flute and clarinet.
Yeah, so I have a couple questions just based on that sort of beginning. So it's really interesting that your dad, being a jazz organist, that he would find you a teacher who was, would be feeding you the songs from the Great American Songbook. So you basically, in addition to sort of your basic saxophone technique, you were also still steeped in the jazz tradition. So this has been something that's really been a part of you.
Yeah, I didn't really have a quote unquote classical teacher until college. Up until then, all my teachers were primarily jazz musicians.
Right. How about high school? How about your high school band?
So so my high school, this is also a great story. So my high school band director was a percussionist. And so we had a jazz band that was a class. I've never known anything other than jazz band as a class because everywhere I've taught, it's also been a class. It's not an extracurricular. But so we had band and jazz band, but he also played drums he had like a weekly jam session in his basement with some friends of his. There was a trumpet player, there was his brother-in-law, and there was a bass player who I had seen play. My parents used to take me to go in the town that I grew up in, Sterling Heights. They used to do these music in the park things. And there was a big band called the Austin Morrow Big Band that was led by a baritone saxophonist named Lanny Austin. Remember that name because he is going to be important with my first teaching job. And Emil Morrow. So they co-led a big band. Every summer they would play a concert in Sterling Heights, and we would always go watch this band. And so anyway, the bass player in that band, Don Lewandowski, played in this weekly session at my band director's house. And also there was a guy that played harmonica named Joe Messina. If you or any of your listeners are, I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but like an expert in Motown, Joe Messina was one of the primary guitar players in the Funk Brothers, the rhythm section that played all these Motown recordings. Yeah, the short version of the story is once Motown moved to LA, he put the guitar in the case and put it under the bed and was out of the music business for a while. And but then he took up the chromatic harmonica and was playing because he wanted to be like Toots Thielsman. So anyway, I look back on that as I was so incredibly fortunate that one, I have this band director that says and I'm, our high school was 10 through 12. So as a sophomore, he's like, do you want to come to this jam session that is in my basement every Wednesday? So, and I had no idea what I was doing yet. Like I was totally an ear player because I just learned stuff off of records. You know, because Mr. Gravel, he wasn't really a jazz musician. He knew the tunes and the standards and that sort of thing, and he understood harmony and stuff, but he wasn't an improviser. So I didn't learn any of that. So I didn't really know what I was doing. So I was like way in over my head. I also think about the fact that like you couldn't do that today. My dad would drive me over to his house, drop me off. I would play this session with these guys, adult men, for like 2 hours or whatever. And then my band director would drive me home.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can't do that anymore.
Yeah, no.
You know, even if I had a student that I wanted to give that kind of opportunity to, I really couldn't, you know, because it's just like a lawsuit waiting to happen. But so anyway, that was kind of I'm sorry.
You would need the parents to come with you.
Well, exactly. I mean, they would basically have to come and sit, you know, while because I would feel comfortable doing that. But I guess this was the late 80s, so I guess that was still okay. The other thing that he was, well, actually there were two things. He encouraged me actually to take lessons with the person that I give, like my primary jazz teacher, like the person who really taught me how to play this music, was a man named George Benson, not the guitar player, but Detroit had a saxophonist named George. He kind of went by George Sax Benson for that reason, so as to not be confused with the guitarist. But he was like I mean, you know, he was one of in the Detroit jazz scene, you know, of people that are legends. He is one of them. And so he was my primary teacher. So I remember my band director saying, like, you know, because I was actually at a point then where Mr. Gravel kind of kicked me out of the nest and said, like, I can't teach you anymore. You've got to go get a new teacher. So I was kind of between teachers, right? So Mr. Haspatcher, who was my band director, said, you know, what about George Benson? Now, I had seen George Benson play, and I was like, he gives lessons? What? So, yeah, of course he gives lessons, but I'm a kid thinking, like, this guy's unbelievable. He doesn't have time to give lessons. Well, it gets deeper than that, because not only did he give me lessons and was one of the top jazz musicians in Detroit, he also happened to be a postman. His day gig was he delivered mail. You know, he went to middle school with Tommy Flanagan, and I mean, he knew all these jazz musicians in Detroit from the 50s that had all gone on to New York. He did not, because he stayed in Detroit to raise a family. And so, you know, he had this job delivering mail. But he was a fantastic teacher. The other thing that was a really great experience for me that Mr. Haspatcher hooked me up with was a local community college had a big band, and he just as like an extra place to go play, you know, outside of school. So, yeah, that was kind of, I mean, you know, the high school band was like your typical high school band, you know, we did the things all the high school bands do.
Yep. Yeah, no, when I was a high school teacher, I was in Monterey, California. So I had the benefit of the Monterey Jazz Festival. Musicians would come like once a month to the schools.
Oh my goodness.
So like they would just show up to my rehearsals and, you know, basically tell me what I was doing wrong.
Right.
And then leave. You know, they didn't have the best bedside manner for a young teacher, but that's fine. But they were great for my kids. And, you know, I had one saxophonist who, when I first got there, was a junior, and he was so much better than everyone else in the group. And he ended up going to Berkeley in Boston and studying. And, but I mean, I leaned on that kid so much the first year, you know, to kind of like build things. And so that having that player who's going to go on with that sort of like improvising jazz background really, really helps a lot for your band.
It does. I mean, I've been doing this now for what I think this is year 26 or something like that. Every once in a while you get a kid that I've got one right now that he's super hungry and he practices constantly, and his growth watching his growth over the last couple of years has just been just a joy to watch. But what it has also done is created an interest in learning how to improvise amongst his peers.
Yeah, exactly.
Which, one of the things that I have struggled with, I still haven't figured out how to really teach improvisation, because it's a complicated subject and the kids have to really want to do the work. And so you can teach the theory behind it, but that doesn't mean you'll sound like a jazz musician, because you don't have the language, right? The only way to really learn the language is to listen to the music a lot and do transcription. Then you put the theory to that, because that's actually the angle I came to it from. Is I learned, just like you learn how to speak, right? You imitate the adults around you. Well, I listened to the music from day one. And then when I started to learn, like when George Benson was teaching me the theory behind things, it's like, oh, okay, that's what that's called. I already had a sound to associate it with, but I think a lot of times in education, what we do is we tell the kids what the thing is before they even understand what the sound is.
Yeah, I teach beginners now, and I'm really big into the sound to sight thing. We just let them play, let them figure out the instrument and how to make a good sound first before we show them music and constrain them. It's so important. But that whole concept, we need to be better with improvisation, I think. And I think this is something that's been acknowledged for years. I don't think this is a secret to any music educators, but doing more improv is only going to help our students grow in every way, whether it's concert band or jazz ensemble or, whatever application is. I'm really interested in how do we sort of, I don't want to pander. That's not what I'm about, but how do we do more vernacular music making in our formal setting? And of course that's at odds with the conservatory model and where, some kids want to go. But by the same token, the way we teach formal music formally isn't really the way most musicians, and when I'm talking about most musicians, I'm talking about people who are not professionals, learn music. And I don't know. It's a big topic, obviously, and there's lots of research into it, and I'm just scratching on the surface here. But I find it really fascinating what you're saying, and I don't know. Do you have any tips for getting your high school musicians improvising? Anything that works, tried and true?
So, one of the things that I started doing a few years ago, and this is still a work in progress, and I'm still it's evolving. So pretty much from the time the kids are a freshman all the way through, over time, I give them like an artist. So each quarter or semester, I'll assign the students an artist and an album. And then what they have to do is basically listen to that album, and then they come in at the end of the semester and we play Drop the Needle. Because that's really the only way you can prove to me that you've been listening. Sure. Right. And I keep a spreadsheet of who I've assigned, like what you've been assigned already. So what artists and what albums. And so that way, over the 4 years, it kind of grows. So in addition to the music we're playing and just doing that sort of listening, this is it's more listening. And the kids that are into it, what it does is it sparks their curiosity, and then they start listening to other things and they're asking me for recommendations. And it's one of those things where like, I'm planting a seed, and then I heard this a few years ago, and I feel like in many ways it really resonates with me, especially when it comes to jazz music. It's an Eastern philosophy that says when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. So like I've tried the force feeding thing. It doesn't work. They shut down and they're not interested. So it's more like, okay, I'm going to plant this seed. And then when you're ready, I've got a lot to offer you. And I can help you in a lot of ways, but you got to be ready. So, and that's, especially the improvising part of it. Because I can rehearse a big band and deal with the style and get them to sound like a good jazz band. And I can get the rhythm section to sound good. But the improvising, That's the hard part.
So we've really been talking a lot, but we haven't really kind of gotten into your teaching stuff. I mean, well, we've talked about teaching, but not sort of your history. So where'd you go to school, and then what was your first job?
I went to Western Michigan, and so I studied music ed because and I had no intention, honestly, of being a teacher. I was going to be a player, and I acted like a performance major. I did all the things a performance major does, and I practiced a lot. And a lot of that was just because people who I respected when I was in high school said, you should get a teaching degree. Now, maybe it was have something to fall back on. Maybe they saw something that I didn't see. I don't know. But so anyway, like I said, I came back from New York, or after college, I went to New York and did that for a little while, and really was like, I can't do this for 30 years because I don't like living here. So I moved back to Detroit, and then was like, okay, well, what's my next move? Because I got to earn a living here. And I'm also in a lot of debt from New York. So I ended up getting a long-term sub position in Roseville, which is another suburb of Detroit, and it was like K6 general music. And so it was going to be like, I forget when it started, maybe mid-February to the end of the year for a maternity leave. And so one of the elementaries that this teacher was stationed at, I go there, meet the principal. She takes me upstairs to show me the room I'm going to teach in, and across the hall is the elementary band teacher at that school, who, remember I said, remember this name? So the big band, was Lanny Austin, was across the hall, which blew my mind. Was like, you're Lanny Austin from, so anyway, we've actually become, he was my first teaching mentor. I learned so much from him. And we're still really close friends. He takes me fishing on his boat. And,
nice.
And he's been retired, God, now for 25 years. But anyway, the following fall, there was going to be, because I think somebody was not being rehired, so there was going to be an opening for elementary band in the district. So I got that job and was in Roseville from 96 until 2002 when we moved here to Chicago. So in Roseville, I taught 4th and 5th grade band. And also I did, after that first year, then I picked up the high school jazz band. So I did that. So that was great. We moved here in 2002. I taught for 2 years at a middle school in Carpentersville, which is a suburb of Chicago. That job came about because a man I met at a camp. Man, I got to tell you, almost everything in my life goes back to this one camp in Wisconsin. There's a camp in Door County, Wisconsin called Birch Creek that I had gone to as a teaching assistant before I started college, because my college saxophone teacher taught up there, and they needed a TA to play in the faculty band and play Barry. So I went up there at Birch Creek. And then let's see. So coming fast forward to 98, and somebody I had met, there's a trumpet player that maybe you know because you're a trumpet player. He teaches at Indiana now. His name's Joey Tartell. Let's see, his fiance was going to Western Michigan. She was a vocal grad assistant, like vocal jazz grad assistant, right? And at the time, he was in Maynard Ferguson's band. So he was like basically camped out in Kalamazoo when they weren't on the road. So I met him then. He had taught at Birch Creek the year before I started and had recommended me. And the guy who's the program director, Jeff Campbell, remembered from back when I was a TA. So anyway, all this to say, I go up to Birch Creek and I taught there like 98, 99, 2000, 2001. One of the guys who teaches the student big bands there was Jim Stombrys. Actually still is Jim's. I mean, Jim's been teaching there forever. So I got to know Jim. And when we were moving to Chicago, I called Jim and was like, hey man, I'm moving to Chicago. I need a job. And so he basically got me my job in Carpentersville, because I don't even know how many resumes I sent out. I got 2 job interviews, and they were both ones that Jim had recommended me for. So I taught in Carpentersville, did middle school and elementary there, and also actually was teaching adjunct at Northern Illinois simultaneously when I first moved out there. Then Mark Dahl was leaving St. Charles North, which is where I teach now. Well, Jim Stambries was teaching at St. Charles North. So Jim called, said, "Hey, Mark's leaving. You want to come teach with me?" Man, I don't have time to teach high school. I'd have to stop playing. An hour later, I hang up the phone. I said to my wife, I'm like, I think I want this job. So it's a really interesting job. I've never been the head band director. I mean, we don't really have that function anyway, the way our scene is kind of set up. It's just a team of musicians and teachers, and we all kind of take a piece of the pie. But I was never responsible for like running the marching band or teaching the wind ensemble. So my job has primarily been teach Capstone Jazz, the second jazz group, other bands at other times. I've taught theory. I taught orchestra for a while, which was super hard, but man, did I learn a lot. So that was a great experience. So I've been there since 2004. Let's see, when Jim retired, Brian had been the lead teacher for the department, but didn't want to do that and be the head band director. So I took over lead teacher. So I remained the lead teacher. Because when Brian retired and we hired Kevin, he kind of oversees the band. Like he teaches the Capstone band group, and we sort of co-teach the freshmen. We have it split. We split it up into 2 different sections. He teaches the brass and the percussion. I teach all the woodwinds, but they meet at the same time. So then we can put them together for, big band. Yeah. So that's kind of, I guess, the arc of my teaching career and what I've been doing for the last 18 years, I guess.
Yeah. So one of the things, John, that really strikes me about you is when I sort of began to look at your recordings, and we've sort of hinted around it here in the interview, and you've mentioned that you're a performer, but you have couple of CDs or 1 CD, or
I've got 2 out, and then I just recorded one back at the end of February that I was hoping to get out by the fall, but I don't think it's probably not going to be now till 23, just because there's a lot that goes into putting out a recording.
Yeah.
And I would have to have a lot of ducks in a row right now, and I don't have those ducks in a row yet. So
yeah, my wife's a cellist, and she's got 2 CDs, and yeah, I know.
Yeah.
You want one?
Yeah, right. I've got boxes of coasters downstairs. This time I'm not printing that many.
They're very expensive.
500 and the other thing too is I did one in 2009, and then I did my second one in 2015. The business totally changed between 2009 and 2015, because in 2009 there really wasn't streaming. People still bought CDs, or if they were gonna if you could buy it on iTunes. You had to spend the $10 to buy the album. There was none of this streaming business. So by 2015, I kind of went into it doing what I had done the first time. And you print way too many CDs. Yep. And you've got you can sell them at gigs, but unless you're touring and playing a lot of gigs, you're not going to sell those CDs.
Yeah, no doubt.
So
no doubt. So my wife plays with the Eastern Music Festival every summer, big music festival. And so that's the only time she ever sells her CDs, because they sell the faculty CDs in the lobby.
Of course. I mean, and it's even to the point where I'll forget to take them, the gig that we played Tuesday night, I just didn't think to take them. And at the end of the gig, the promoter was on the microphone. She goes, "Did you bring CDs?" And I said, "Totally forgot." I also blame the pandemic. Man, I'm just out of the habit. It's we're still figuring out how to get back into this.
Yeah. So, the big question then is, how do you maintain, and you've been teaching for 25 plus years now, how do you maintain your career as a teacher and as a performer? Because, I know I have a lot of listeners who want to perform more, or who are like me and they want to compose more. And it's difficult to keep balls in the air while you're juggling these two very time-consuming things.
Right. I think in my case, it's a couple of things. One is that I'm fortunate that the job I have, I'm not alone. And we've got a pretty good division of labor, you know. And also our program, you know, we don't compete in any way. So while I do have the students perform a lot, you know, for instance, like the top jazz band, my goal every year is for them basically to have like a gig a month, because I feel like that kind of keeps us growing, and it really helps the band get better. But I feel like this is a whole separate discussion, I think. So just in a nutshell, I kind of feel like it's better to have authentic performance experiences versus just doing like competitions and festivals. I mean, we've done some of that, and I think there's a time and a place for that. But I just feel like, at least for our community and my students, having authentic performance experiences seems to be better. So all that to say, it's not as time consuming as if we had like a competitive marching band and we were out every weekend doing competitions and that sort of thing. Like, we're a football band, so every kid in band is in the marching band, and we just do home football games, and they have a blast. And, you know, we do the one show. And so there's some division of labor. But the other thing is, you know, like, I can't do every gig that I necessarily want to. And I had to come to terms with that at a point, to realize, like, you're just not going to be able to do everything. You know, and I've had to turn some stuff down that I really wanted to do. But at the end of the day, I have to weigh what's going on at school against, you know, whatever that gig is. Like, example that comes to mind is back in November, a pianist that I play with pretty regularly. Well, I play in his groups and he plays in my group. His name is Ryan Cohen. He had a playing and teaching residency in Portugal for 2 weeks back in November that he asked me to do. Well, I mean, I suppose I could have taken the 2 weeks off of school and done the thing in Portugal. The problem was, we had 3 concerts at school booked during that time. So what am I going to do? Like, lay that on my colleagues and say, hey, can you guys cover me? You know, and also I'm always a little wary of the message that sends to the students. So, you know, I can't do everything.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way of looking at it too. Is you can't do everything. I think a lot of people, especially young people, have that FOMO syndrome. You know, that fear of missing out, or if I don't do something. Now, on the other hand, if you turn down too many gigs, you're not going to get asked to play those gigs anymore. So how do you balance that aspect of it?
I mean, I've been in town long enough now that I feel like the groups that I play in are kind of the groups that I play in. So it's not like it was 15, 20 years ago. But when I was doing more sort of pickup stuff, there was sort of, I noticed a pattern of seasons in my life. And so by the end of summer, I'm playing a lot because I'm on a bunch of gigs, and the more people see you, the more they think of you, and then they may ask you to play gigs. And then suddenly August rolls around and school starts and football starts and marching band starts, and I'm not as available. And so now I'm saying no. And so for the next 2 months, I'm not playing too many gigs, and then everything kind of slows down. And then it starts to pick up again. And it's basically this kind of up and down depending on what's going on at school. In terms of managing all of it, I think, you know, it's just a matter of obviously time management. You know, you just got to be super organized. The practice part of it, the answer that I found was, I mean, I still shed, but it tends to be a little more focused on like, okay, what's the hottest fire? It's like I'm preparing for a gig. And the way I keep my doubles up is I play every day at school. So I'm playing like all day long with the kids. And that's kind of how it's basically like survival, you know? So that's kind of how I've handled that. So it's doable. I think you have to be in the right kind of job. You have to have the right mindset. And you have to be willing to say no, and occasionally, and I've had really super understanding colleagues too. Like occasionally I get a gig, like I really want to do this. And like, can you cover me so I can go do this gig? And they have, but I've been super careful to not abuse it. At least I think I would hope they would tell me if I was abusing it, but I have felt like I have been judicious about, not abusing that relationship,
Yeah, it's so funny. I teach beginners, so I get a lot of long tones. I get a lot of I play, you play. So, I keep my chops up. My range isn't really expanding, when you play at the bottom of the trumpet all the time. But, it's what it is.
Yeah. Well, sometimes, if we're doing scales and stuff, like if I'm playing flute, I'll just play an octave higher.
Yeah.
Then what are you doing? I'm like, I'm working on my third octave. You can too.
Well, it kills me because sometimes I'll have the trumpet out and the trombones will be like, can you do it on baritone so we can hear the right octave? All right. That kind of thing. But I don't, the only instrument I don't play, I play, you play with is the saxophone, to be honest, because I don't think I get a good sound on it. And I don't think I've ever gotten a good sound on it. So I don't want to model a bad sound. So
yeah, that's because I used to actually, out of sheer laziness, I would play flugelhorn a lot. In jazz band, I think part of it, I told myself like, well, when I'm improvising, then it's like, it's simpler, right? And I can relate to the kids more. But really, it was just like, all I have to do is pick this up and not deal with a reed. But I thought like, I'm not presenting to the kids the best possible sound. So I should be playing on instruments that I'm an expert on.
Yeah, no, I'll play on clarinet because I get a good clarinet sound. And then I'll play on my trumpet if I really need to make sure that they're hearing a good sound. I mean, a good, rich, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic because I think I really believe that as a teacher, man, it's so much more efficient to just play and not. I mean, music is sound anyway, right? It's not like, why talk about it?
Yeah, I'm telling you, I could do I play, you play for a whole class because I can teach so much without saying a word. You could do dynamics, you can do tonguing, you could do all kinds of things with that. You do ear training because you don't tell them what note's coming and then they have to figure out what you're playing.
That's right.
Absolutely the best thing we do. And it's all long tones basically. So yeah, anyway, I can get off that soapbox. But yeah, I mean, I think if you're trying to race through lines in a method book, it's a little bit counterproductive. You still want to do that stuff, but you also want to work on basic tone production
Absolutely.
First.
Yep.
All right. So, yeah, it's fascinating to me to because we don't get a lot of people who are high school band directors who are doing a lot of extra things. A lot of people sort of throw themselves fully into the job and, other things. Let's go. And that's an overgeneralization, of course. There are plenty of people who are doing lots of great things, but
for sure.
But it just seems like that's the trend. But life's busy. So you said something earlier about you offer each of your students has to do a drop the needle listening. Do you have for those who are out there teaching jazz or big band right now, do you have any recommended recordings that like you fall back on, just a couple that you always give out?
And I also try to, once I get to kind of know the kids, I'll think of it like something that I think they might enjoy. I've done more sort of along the lines of artists. So like if you're a saxophone player, you play alto, I kind of lean towards people like Sonny Stitt and Cannonball Adderley. I wait for Charlie Parker only because it's so much. It's hard and sometimes it can be hard to understand. And the other thing about Charlie Parker is like, you got to find the right recordings too, because depending on what you're listening to, I think it can be, like if he was sick, it's still genius, right? And there's value in everything he ever did because he was, one of the creators of this music. But there are certain recordings that I think for a student are better than others.
Yeah, no doubt.
Tenor players, I like to do Hank Mobley a lot because his language is super clear, and it's kind of for the same reasons I do Sonny Stitt. And you can do Sonny Stitt on tenor as well. So what does I say? Yeah, Hank Mobley, Dexter Gordon, earlier John Coltrane. Those are some specific recordings. Like some of the stuff he did with Miles Davis. For trumpet players, I'm a big fan of Kenny Dorham for kids because I feel like because it's not super flashy and it's not super rangy. Like, I mean, for me, my favorite trumpet player is Freddie Hubbard and always will be because I just love Freddie. Like but I think for a student that can be overwhelming, unless it's the right personality. So, also, in addition to Kenny Dorham, I do a lot of Blue Mitchell.
I was just going to say that because when I was an undergrad, Blue Mitchell on those Horace Silver recordings, man, just really love his improvising
great sound.
Yeah.
It's swinging.
Yeah.
But it's not like, like I said, like Freddie or Clifford Brown, it's like, man, that's amazing, but I can't do that.
Well, it's a Charlie Parker kind of thing.
And the other thing too, this kind of similar with Miles Davis. I've had a few trumpet players like, oh, I'm going to transcribe this Miles Davis solo, and they'll do something off of Kind of Blue. And I'm like, okay. And then they come back and I'm like, that stuff's a lot harder than it sounds, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because he's such an amazing trumpet player. He makes it sound easy.
Yeah. And the best do.
There's not a lot of notes, but.
Yeah, the best do, don't they? We had a very good improviser in college and he'd like hear him play trumpet. You'd think, he's not really very good, but boy, he really could improvise his, off. And it's funny how the really good players can make it sound so that they're not working at it almost. And that's not the right way of looking at it but you understand. I think I'm clear about
absolutely.
What I mean.
Absolutely.
Cause there's a lot of work behind the scenes on that.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Do you want me to keep going down on the instruments?
Oh, I don't know. It just depends on you. How about trombone?
Right. Trombone. I tend to do like JJ and Curtis Fuller. JJ Johnson. I shouldn't assume. Okay. So JJ Johnson, Curtis Fuller. Yeah, the list isn't as long on that because then you get into some like pyrotechnical kind of trombone players. And if I'm just trying to like get you to understand the language and just the sound and the language, exactly the feel, right? I kind of stick with those guys. So like with bass players, I'll do Ray Brown, Paul Chambers. I tend to start with those guys. Drummers will do, either Philly Joe or Jimmy Cobb. Although I've been leaning into Billy Higgins a lot. I've been doing a lot of, I ended up I got back into vinyl during the pandemic. And so I got all my dad's old recordings and then I've been buying a lot of stuff too. And I've been listening to all these records with Billy Higgins on them and just been like, man, he's so swinging and his left hand comping it's just like, man, if all you do is just do what he's doing, you will have a really great basis of how to play this music. I think he gets overlooked, because it's so good and it's so subtle that, his name isn't one that people talk about in the same breath as like Elvin Jones and Tony Williams, right? Because they changed the way people play drums.
How about pianists?
I like Wynton Kelly. I like Ahmad Jamal, actually. Sometimes I will give to piano players. I also like to give them Oscar Peterson's We Get Requests, because that record in particular, actually, you can give that record to anybody in the rhythm section because it's got great bass playing. It's got Ed Thigpen playing great drums and Oscar Peterson, it's just great, piano trio kind of stuff.
How about Blues and the Abstract Truth? Do you ever give that one out?
I don't, but it's a great record.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites.
It's an amazingly great record.
Is it just too much for kids?
I think so. It's a little, I think a more advanced student, maybe, I guess right now I'm thinking of like, these are like freshman, sophomore kids I'm just trying to kind of expose to the music.
How about big band stuff? Do you do any swing band, like early big band stuff?
we do less of it than I used to, but I still think it's important. I mean, we do a lot of Basie, and we do some Ellington.
Well, that swing era music's a lot different than what happens after the war. I mean, it's very different.
For sure.
So
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, one of the things I also, just from a programmatic standpoint, I figure over the course of 4 years, I want to expose the kids to Duke Ellington, Count Basie, and the people that wrote for Count Basie, Charles Mingus, a lot of, like, and we'll do arrangements by people of like tunes written by, say Freddie Hubbard or Wayne Shorter, or a lot of the Art Blakey kind of stuff that's sometimes written for big band. And so I'm in addition to the listening, I'm also trying to get at them and teach them the history and the breadth of the music through the lit that we're playing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just like I guess you would it's a lot easier in an orchestra, I think, than in a band. The tricky thing about band is percussion.
Yeah, it is, because, a lot of the transcriptions don't have a lot of percussion, or it's just not appropriate. Orchestra's an interesting beast, right? Because a lot of kids can't play, young orchestras can't play a lot of the great literature, and you can't play Mahler when you're a kid. It's a non-starter. So, it's trickier in some ways. But of course there's a vast breadth of literature available, to choose from. So I don't know. I'm also, I do like the band idiom, because it seems like there's more current music and current composers and more diversity in general. And I'm down with those things. So, my wife's an orchestral musician, and that has its thing.
I guess the thing for me that it takes me a long time to find lit for band is because I'm trying to find stuff that is interesting to play, that has melody and good counterpoint. And there's a lot of modern band music that I feel like is uber repetitive.
It's textural.
Exactly. And I think from a player standpoint, it's kind of like, how do you rehearse this every day and not lose your mind? It's like it's a sound concept, right? I'm living in this sound world, but from a player's standpoint, and I think this is where sometimes I kind of color my teaching, is because I'm a player. I'm always thinking about from sitting in the ensemble perspective, like if I'm playing 64 bars of this 3-note motive over and over and over, it takes a lot of maturity, I think, to like lose your ego and kind of get lost in that world, versus I've got some really interesting melodies to play. But then there's also a lot that teaches you from playing like I've got melodies and counter melodies, and kind of like making musical decisions about how to interact with that. And I think that actually has dividends for kids in society. Like, this is how you interact with people.
Yep. Subtleties and nuance, things that tend to be somewhat lacking at the moment in society.
Exactly. I mean, that's like nail on the head. So, I don't know, but that's just my opinion. So everybody's got an opinion.
Yes, they do. And a microphone.
Right. I think the reason I always keep coming back to this, when I was teaching orchestra, I don't remember who did the arrangement. There was this really great arrangement. It was like a grade 4 arrangement of Academic Festival Overture for just strings. But it was done in such a way that like every kid in the orchestra had stuff, and they just loved it. And it sort of dawned on me, it was like, there's not a single wasted note in here, right? Like Brahms didn't write anything that was not absolutely necessary.
Yes. Because he burned everything that wasn't. No, I'm just
right. But I think sometimes in modern composition, that's not necessarily true.
So, John, I ask these questions of all my guests. I call it my enlightened round because there's nothing enlightening about it. And so the first one of these is probably the most controversial of them. At least it draws the most the biggest range of answers. And that's, where do you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy competition in music?
So do you mean like within the philosophy of a program? Like if I'm going to have a program that's going to do a lot of competitions, or do you mean between students?
It can be either, and it's the way you want to interpret it. If you have a big competitive marching program, that's probably where you're going to focus. If you don't do a lot of outside competition, then it might be internal competition. It's just, where do you place that and how do you manage it, I guess, is really.
So I'll start by saying I think some healthy competition among students, I think, is a healthy thing. As long as it doesn't turn into
grudge match.
It doesn't get ugly, right? But I think, I've seen it can be a good motivator. Along the same lines, I think, sometimes I look at school programs that are big competitive programs and they're really successful, and their groups sound really good, but I wonder how much of it is about the music. I think it takes a special kind of okay, so let me back up for a second, because there are some people that I think have managed to navigate that well. I don't think I can. I don't know how to do it. And I want everything to be about the music.
That's me too.
But I have a friend who teaches outside of Grand Rapids, Michigan, named Mark Townley. He's at Byron Center. And they're like a perennial, essentially Ellington school every year. And I've worked with his band a couple times, and those kids they're all about the music. It just so happens, though, that they're really successful when they go into these more competitive environments. Because I think he's got a competitive marching band, at least on some level. I don't think they're super competitive, but they do some competition. They just have a really healthy, like, okay, we're going to do these things, but it's not about winning or a trophy. It's more about the music. I don't know how he's figured out how to do it. In the community I teach in, there's a ton of athletes. Like there's a really big athletic thing. We've got a lot of athletes that play in music. So sometimes I've wondered if we kind of jumped that line where the kids kind of put that athletic mindset into what they're doing. I just feel like for what we're doing, it's healthier to just make it about the music. And like I said earlier, have some authentic performance experiences that way, versus going and trying to win a trophy, So yeah, I'm not sure that answers the question, but I guess that's kind of where I'm looking at it from.
All right, John. So the next question is, affects a lot of band directors. And I know we've already talked about how you manage to do two things at a high level. And that's, how have you found a work-life balance in your career, or have you?
I think I have. I feel like it gets easier the longer you've been doing it.
Oh, no doubt.
Right. It gets easier to do that, but also just teaching gets easier. Not that I have it figured out in any way, but it wasn't until around year 10 where I finally felt like, okay, I'm starting to understand how to do this. So I think getting back to, I think you said earlier, like there's a big attrition rate. I think there's more reasons to it in education in general.
Yes, especially right now.
It has more to do, it's not just work-life balance and that sort of thing, but I feel like if you kind of have to stick with it long enough to feel like you're starting to get a handle on it. I also feel like too, though, you really have to be, I think, to be a really good music teacher, you have to love music.
Oh, yes.
If you're not really in love with music, this is going to be a really hard path. And that might be part of it too, because I think, this is, I guess, as the kids would say, real talk. You went into music ed in college because you really liked band. And you got through, and then you got out and you got a job, but you're not like, you like band and you like all the peripheral stuff that goes with band, and you kind of like being in an ensemble, but you're not on fire for music, right? So I think that's maybe part of the problem. That wasn't your question, though.
No, but that's real talk.
Yes, it is. And I guess I feel like I see a fair amount of that in like student teachers and stuff, you know?
Yes. When the rubber meets the road, because
Mm-hmm.
the job isn't necessarily music. So if you don't have that fire for music, where are you going to get it?
Exactly.
You know, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just to say, like, you need that fire for music to do all the other stuff that kind of sucks.
Oh yeah. Most of it sucks.
Yeah. So, you know, right. I mean, you just have to be, it's like, I got to do this stuff so that I can make music with kids.
Yeah.
Because that's the part I like. So I feel like the way you kind of balance the work thing is like, when I'm at school, I just go 1,000 miles an hour from the minute I walk in the door until the minute I leave. And I'm also okay with basically perpetually being behind and not caught up, you know? So I just kind of have a rolling to-do list. I use this thing called Todoist, which is really great because you can just keep moving due dates, right? So it's like, I have this, you know, I walk in the morning, I'm like, okay, this is what I'm going to do today. And then sometimes I get to the end of the day and it's like, I just don't have the bandwidth to deal with this today. And it's not a hot fire. So I'm just going to move it to tomorrow. And that's been really a healthy way for me to say like, okay, I'm leaving at whatever time and that's it. I'm done.
I think about it like juggling. I have the podcast. I teach music appreciation at the local university. You know, I teach my beginners and I compose. And so sometimes a ball has to go up in the air and stay up in the air for a little bit longer than probably it should, because otherwise I'm not going to get this thing done that has to be done. So, you know, it's just what it is.
You know, and I think for a young teacher too, you've got to sort of like establish sort of what's important to you, right? What are the non-negotiables for you as a teacher? Focus on those things every day in the classroom, and then just the rest of it, just do the best you can.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
that's really good advice. That's really good advice. And you know what? That helps, you know, not a teaching philosophy, because it's not philosophy, but it helps you to plan your day because you know what's important. And so then you build your whole curriculum around that. Now, your philosophy should be something that's broader, that's part of this, but not what's determining that.
Sure. And it'll evolve over time anyway.
Of course. You know, the one thing about teaching too is it's like we talked about with performing or composing or improvising, it is a craft. So the more you do it, the more you're able to do it more quickly. You know, that's the big difference between now and me 25 years ago is I don't need nearly the prep time to prepare because I've got the experience and the skills to do it with less. Now I still study scores and do all those things, but you know, it's interesting. I was putting in a bathroom floor, I don't know, about 7 or 8 years ago. And I asked a friend who was did a lot of home stuff, repair stuff, was really good with this sort of thing. He's a contractor kind of guy. And I said, so I need to put this tile floor in. And I said, do you have any advice? He goes, no, you're smart enough. Just take your time. It's going to take you twice as long as a professional, but that's all it is professionals can do it quickly because they know how to do it. If you take your time, you're going to be fine. And he was right.
Yeah.
Took me, you know, much longer than it should have, but it was the first time I had done it and I did it right. So it's just, yeah. Anyway. All right. So my next question is the big one for the podcast, and everyone answers it a little bit differently. And that's, what are the challenges facing band and or music education? And how do you think we're going to meet those challenges?
You know, I think this is something I kind of struggle with because I think if you're playing the music that I'm trying to find the words to articulate this. Sometimes I find this easier to do with jazz band than I do in a concert band setting, to be relevant.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. So it's like, this is where I think I spend probably most of my preparation time trying to find the right literature to play. So there's a whole like, okay, I've got 6 percussionists, so I need to pick music that is good and challenging for 6 percussionists, but it's also melodic, and it's got, if the band is here, I want to kind of put the goalpost just a little bit above that so they get better and all that sort of thing. But also, one of the things, and I'm sure that everybody that's listening to this that is over the age of maybe 35 or maybe 30, I don't know. Kids don't know how to phrase anymore. And the reason I think this is because if you listen to pop music, it's all like really short. I don't even know if they're 2-measure phrases, to be honest. And they breathe, like, go back and listen to music from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Long melodies, there's phrasing, there's just a lot more musicianship, right? And so kids that listen to modern pop music, I don't think get exposed to that. Now, I think it's really important to try to teach them that, which is also why I play all day. But just to kind of like, how do we bridge the gap between playing music that doesn't, like, it's not part, when they walk out of the band room, like, that's not the kind of stuff that they're listening to or hear. I kind of have to meet them where they're at and also kind of like bring up their cultural awareness somehow. I feel like that's the biggest challenge because there's this breakdown between society and great art, I guess the chasm between those two things is getting wider and wider and wider. And I don't know what the answer is other than, I guess, what I said I'm trying to do. And I feel like I'm maybe a little successful. Either that or the kids are just like super compliant and they don't, but they're not quitting. So I guess they dig it.
Yeah, I think if you're giving them a good experience, they often come to the music. That's not to say that it's not important. You have to pick music that's engaging for the kids. They don't want to be bored.
Yeah.
No, it's tricky, and it's you want to give them quality literature, but yet you also want to give them literature that's going to be fun. There's like some candy along with the vegetables.
That is true. Which is something that for the longest time I was like, man, I'm not doing cheese, but there's some good stuff though. That's like, I let Brian used to let, with the guy I teach the second band. So Brian used to let the seniors kind of pick something. Right. And so, I said to them, like, well, look, it's really tricky. Why don't you just pick 3 things and let us decide?
Mm-hmm.
That's genius. Okay, I'll do that. So they ended up picking this arrangement of music from Dear Evan Hansen.
Oh, yeah.
Which I wasn't really familiar with. I had never seen the show, but it's some really good stuff in there. And it's melodic and it goes into some crazy keys. Like, it's hard, great.
Yeah.
Right? It's really great. And they love it because, like, they know the musical and they know the story behind it. And I think for teenagers, it's kind of important. Like they kind of feel seen doing something like that. And so, I don't have to just do the Suite of Old American Dances.
All right. My favorite question of the interview is, if I had a time machine and I could take you back to the afternoon of your high school graduation, what are you going to tell yourself?
Boy, that's a good. I feel like what I would say is things aren't going to turn out the way you think they are. And that's okay. However, you keep doing what you think you need to do, because I feel like I don't think I would change anything if I went back in time. Like, I went all the way through high school and college with this mindset, like, I'm going to be the best saxophone player in the world, which is ridiculous. But when you're 18, 19, 20, that's what gets you in the practice room for 6 hours a day, which is what you've got to do if you want to be really good. So, I just worked really hard at trying to become a good musician. And because of that, all of these opportunities have opened up for me. And I have, like, the life I have now is because I worked at it and just kept an open mind. So that's a very interesting question.
It is. And it's I think it's a really important question because it makes us all kind of reflect on our decisions and our paths, because every time I ask it and every time someone answers it, and this is your episode number 204, so I've asked this question a lot, but each time I think about my own choices and I go back and I think, okay, what would I change? And, for me, it's really simple. I probably would have switched to a low brass instrument, probably the euphonium or the trombone, because I'm better set up for it physiologically. But beyond that, I made a lot of mistakes, but those mistakes kind of made me who I am. So, if you take those mistakes away, would I have the same skill base, I guess?
Right. I believe it was Yoda who said, "Failure, the greatest teacher is."
Indeed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's a good question for that, because it's anything that's self-reflective is a good question. All right, this question is, what would be the final work for wind ensemble or band? But in your case, it could be anything, because I know you're a jazz musician first. But what would you want to be the last thing you perform or hear, if you could control that particular decision?
Well, it's hard, because if I was playing, that's hard to explain, because the moments that have been the most euphoric for me as a performer have been in an improvising moments where, like, everybody on the bandstand were in total, like, 100% trust, and it's the communication is on such a high level that it's difficult to explain.
No, I get it.
Happening. That being said, if there's one piece of music that I love more than anything, actually, it is the first movement of Beethoven's Third Symphony.
Oh, excellent choice.
I just love that thing. It's just, man, it's amazing to me. And every time I listen to it, I hear something new. And I've listened to it thousands of times. It's my favorite piece of music on the planet. And my second favorite piece of music on the planet is A Love Supreme. So either one of those, and I'd be happy.
Is there anything coming up that you'd like to share or promote?
Let's see. I mean, I don't have anything really. Like I said, I just did a recording, but it's not really ready to be out, and it won't be for, this is April 2022, so it's probably not going to be out till 23. My guess is. So,
well, these interviews are, they're everlasting. They're there for a long time. So
that's true. So
someone may listen to this in 2025 and be going, "What are you talking about?"
Hey, go back and check out that. But it doesn't have a name yet. Although I think it's going to be called Swing of the Pendulum.
Swing of the Pendulum.
I think Pendulum. Yeah, I think so. So, other than that, if you want to see me play in Chicago, I try to keep my itinerary up to date on my website, which is jwojojazz.com.
Excellent. And everyone should go check it out and listen to some of the recordings, because there's some great stuff there. All right. How can people get in touch with you?
Well, that would be one way. Go to the website. I guess that's the best way, because I kind of have, I have Facebook and I have an Instagram, but I kind of have it locked down because, well, I teach high school kids. So I have to keep, even though I really only use it for professional reasons, if not for gigs and stuff, I probably wouldn't even have that stuff, because just social media is kind of depressing.
It sure is.
But I have to keep it kind of on lockdown, so you can't just go check it out. So really, the website would be the best way, So.
Yeah, no doubt. I don't know what's going on with my camera at the moment. Flashing. Am I flashing on your screen?
You are. You look like Max Headroom.
I don't know what the heck's going on with my camera. Good thing this isn't like going on YouTube, right? John, I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. This was great.